I know this guy who moved to Tokyo when he was about 30. I worked with him. He was a part-time worker. One night, I was around his place. He was hosting a drinking party. We were chatting about his past and why he decided to pack up everything and move out to Tokyo. Well, he kind of avoided the question, but I kept on asking him. He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Don't ask." I didn't get what the big deal was, so I kept on insisting. We kept on drinking, and I guess eventually the booze loosened his tongue. He told me this creepy little story about his past. After graduating from university, he got himself what he called a normal job in his hometown. He was still living with his parents at the time. One evening, he'd finished up work a little earlier than usual. He was walking home from the station when he saw a woman approaching. She came rushing right up to him. Hey, long time no see," she called out cheerfully. "How are you?" She was making out like they were the closest of friends or something, but he had never seen this woman before as far as he could tell. He wondered if maybe she could be an old friend he'd forgotten or something. It would have felt rude just to outright ask her who she was, so he pretended to go along with it. Yeah, long time. I'm doing well. How are you doing?" The woman stood there smiling at him. Then she plunged her hands into a handbag and pulled out a small navy blue notebook. He caught a glimpse of the front of the book in gold letters. It was a disabled person's notebook, it said. He was surprised because he couldn't see any physical sign of disability in this woman. He asked her about it. What's this?" "Here, take a look." There was a photo of the woman, and right next to her photo it stated she was mentally ill. When he saw the name written in the book, he remembered who she was. When he was in high school and a little more immature, he used to bully this woman a bit. Her name was Michio. Now she was in front of him smiling. He faked a smile back at her. "Don't you remember me? That's a real shame. For the last 10 years, I haven't been able to forget about you. Don't worry, that's okay. You know this notebook here? It protects me. If I killed someone, how much trouble do you think I would get in? I'm sure that the media and police would wonder, but they wouldn't get that involved once they saw this book. It says that I'm mentally ill. I wouldn't even get prison time or the death penalty. Trust me, I've looked into it. It's not hard to get yourself a little book like this, if you know the right people. Did you know that? You know, I really didn't expect to run into you today. I didn't even bring my tools with me. I have big plans for you, you know. I could never take you on, though, if you knew it was coming, so I guess today's your lucky day. I'm not gonna kill you today, but another day. Who knows?" She stood there smiling and did a cute wave. She turned her back and left. He said he couldn't move. He was so shocked she had just said all that right to his face. She was smiling, but her eyes were crazed. He knew she meant exactly what she said. If she did have her tools on her that day, she would have killed him instead of ever speaking to him at all. After that encounter, needless to say, he was terrified she would come for him. He was still living with his parents, so it wouldn't have been too hard for her to turn up to his house in the middle of the night. He was scared to sleep. He was scared of what might happen to his folks. He knew he had to leave town right now. He packed up his things and headed for Tokyo. He told his parents not to tell anyone where he was going. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not trying to justify bullying, but that was many years ago when they were kids. And it wasn't even particularly harsh bullying from what I could tell either. Just teasing and stuff like that. This woman coldly calculated her revenge plan. It's not like he still bullied people later into his school years either. He lives in fear each day now. Fear that she'll somehow find him. He only wants to work part-time, so he's not in the public eye as often. But on the other hand, I guess you could call this somewhat of a karma story. It's a very distressing one, though, and one that I'll never forget. I do deliveries for my local Papa John's. I'm in college, so this is just one of the few jobs I could choose from. A few of my friends work there too, but we're all delivery drivers, so even when we have the same shifts, we don't really see each other. Anyway, this happened to me last December while I was picking up some extra shifts before Christmas. This night it was snowing a good amount, making deliveries take longer than usual. We were also getting more deliveries than usual. I was never too stressed about work though. Having to go non-stop for hours on end was definitely not enjoyable, but it was still work nonetheless. At 9:30, I grabbed my next set of orders to deliver and jumped in my car to get the directions up. I had 2 orders and the houses happened to be 5 minutes away from each other. They were both pretty far away from the shop though. They were each 15 minutes away, which was more like 30 minutes in this weather. The first part of the drive was completely normal, but then it began taking me toward the less visited part of town. The houses were older and most of the shops in the area had closed. Nobody ever came around here unless they lived here because it was so old. It just wasn't up to today's standards. After 20 minutes of driving, I pulled into one of the neighborhoods and drove down the road to the first house. The road was very bare, no cars parked at the side at all, and most of the houses looked abandoned. Once I got to the first address, I parked on the road and walked up to the front door. A kind old man answered the door and paid for the pizza. I went back and set the directions for the next home. It was in the same neighborhood, sure, but it was taking me much deeper into that neighborhood, to the point where there were less and less houses and more space in between them. By the time I got to the actual address, I couldn't see any other houses around it at all. It was surrounded completely by trees. I parked on the street and walked up to the front door. I knocked on the door and waited patiently on the porch. It was pretty cold out, and the snow was soaking my clothes. That wasn't really helping. Finally, after a minute, the door opened. It was a middle-aged woman who looked like she'd just woken up. Her hair was messy, and she had tired, emotionless eyes. "I have your order here? 2 pizzas?" I said, holding out the boxes and giving her the total to pay. She grabbed the boxes and placed them on the table next to her, then told me to wait a moment for her to get some cash. Another minute went by before the door opened again. She started sifting through the cash, counting it slowly and trying to add it all up. There was definitely something off about her. It was hard to pinpoint exactly what it was though, but everything she was doing was just odd. As if she wasn't struggling enough with counting the cash, she started up some small talk with me as well. It was fairly normal stuff, how my day was, all that sort of thing. I responded politely. It was really weird though. It looked like she was trying to stall for some reason. While she was talking, I looked back at my car just to distance myself from the uncomfortable situation. I was quick to see a man standing right next to it now. He was looking in the windows and doing something to the door. When I looked back at the woman, her face had shifted to anger. I figured it out all too late though. She reached out and grabbed me, then started yelling to the man by my car. He turned around and started sprinting towards us. The woman tried to pull me into the house, but I pushed her away and broke free. My instincts took hold of me, and I sprinted off into the trees. I could hear the man's heavy footsteps crunching in the snow behind me, all the way through the forest until they started to fade away. After 2 minutes of sprinting, I stopped to catch my breath. Luckily, the moon was lighting up the forest enough for me to navigate through it and back to one of the streets in the neighborhood. I called 911 once I was able to, and after 10 minutes of waiting in the cold, an officer arrived. Another patrol went to the house, finding the man outside in the act of trying to break into my car. To keep things from dragging on, basically the motive was due to the couple running out of money and resorting to robbing my vehicle. The whole distraction was so the man could rob my car without me ever knowing, but since I caught him in the middle of it, it's not really clear what they would have done to me. Maybe they would have just let me go, but it's obvious I would have reported them, so I don't think it's likely they would have. I'm just thankful for getting away unharmed and for being the first victim they tried it on before being arrested. They'll never have the chance to do anything like that to anyone else. This happened like 12 years ago. I was 14 and my sister was 12. It was during summer vacation. We were hanging out, just the two of us outside, midday. We lived in a smallish town, where during the weekdays it was pretty empty because adults were all at work. Anyway, we'd just been messing around, picking flowers and doing some other random crap, when we decided to cut through a massive field of undeveloped land on the edge of our suburb. It was technically a shortcut to get home, but it wasn't the best idea. It was really bumpy, potted land that other kids and teens had left all sorts of shit laying in. Well, our bad decision came back around and bit us. We hadn't even made it very far into the field when my sister got two bad things at once. Some sort of twisted metal, perhaps an old piece of a tool, had pierced right through her foam flip-flop and into her foot. Right after this happened, she shrieked, jerked, and twisted that ankle on uneven ground. She started crying and howling. Of course, I was worried. The metal hadn't gone too deep, thankfully, and I was able to stop the bleeding with the hem of my shirt, but she couldn't walk anymore, obviously. Our parents weren't available, didn't know where we were, and this was before I had a cell phone. Well, crap. My sister was still on the ground crying. I was trying to calm her down when something made me feel the need to look up. It was the feeling of us being watched. Out in the field across the road, standing on the corner in the distance, was a random guy watching us. He was too far away for me to see him clearly. All I could tell for sure was that he was blonde, an adult, and dressed way too warmly for July. He was all alone, stood stock still, just staring at us. I've always been a skittish horse, so I looked back at my sister and said to get on my back. I was carrying her home and we were leaving right now. I had to carefully pick my way through this stupid field in my own crappy flip-flops, with my crying sister on my back. Luckily, she was tiny. I wasn't exactly a linebacker myself. It had rained a couple of days ago, and the field had puddles of slimy water in the low spots. We were both wet and soaking from her falling when she got hurt. I swiveled back to check if the man was still watching us, and he was. Not only was he still watching us, he'd crossed the road and was entering the field. He was now standing stock still again, just watching. Ice in the veins doesn't even describe it. One of the scariest moments of my life up to that point. My sister looked when I looked, saw my face, and started crying even harder. I shook her a bit on my back and whispered something like, "Stop it. I need to concentrate on getting us home. Watch him and tell me if he starts following again." So that's what we did. I started walking as fast as I could without getting hurt. My sister watched him while I carried her. After a minute, she started whispering to me that he was moving again. "How fast?" "Just walking." "Is he watching us?" "Yes." I told her to tell me if anything changed and kept going. I stomped through puddles I couldn't see into when I had to, hoping there was nothing sharp in them. I lost a flip-flop in the mud, but I just kept going. We were about 3/4 of the way through the massive field when my sister whispered what I least wanted to hear. He was chasing us. I turned us right around so we were facing him head on and yelled as loud as I could, "Hey, we see you! Fuck off and leave us alone or I'll call the cops!" There was no response. He stopped when I stopped, but gave no sign of acknowledging he'd heard me. I turned around again and kept going. My sister was shaking like a leaf, just saying my name over and over again. It was awful, but there was nothing I could do but to keep going. He started following again, this time at a slower pace. I finally made it to our suburb and out of the muddy field, on to solid concrete. I told my sister to hold on as tight as she could, and I booked it. I was running with her on my back as fast as I could manage. We couldn't see the man anymore. We didn't know what he was doing or where he was. I was going to make it to our house or die trying. Every muscle hurt from carrying her so far. My bare foot was all busted up from the road, but I didn't stop. I kept moving with my sister looking behind us. It felt like my heart was going to burst. The fear and suspense was awful. After what felt like forever, I made it to our house, ran across the yard, up the drive, put down my sister who'd started crying again. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely use my key. We made it in safely and called my mom. She had us lock every door and window and came rushing home, but nothing happened after. The man never found us, and we never saw him again after that. And that's the end. I have no idea who he was or why he was following us like that, but it gives me chills to this day. The way he'd stop when I stopped, the way he ignored my yelling, I don't know what he wanted or what he was doing, and I don't ever want to know. This was just last winter in early February. I was driving to my next DoorDash order. I was a bit tired as I'd been driving for the last 4 hours, and it was almost 12 a.m. After this one, I was definitely calling it a night and heading home. I was worried about getting sleepy on the road, especially with all the ice and snow around. I was driving down a fairly empty road. It was a side road that connected two of the main towns in our city. There was a 5-meter stretch, though, that had no buildings or houses anywhere. As I was driving down this section, I don't really know what happened. I just got hit with a sudden wave of tiredness that made me lose focus on the road for just a few seconds. That was all it took, though. I guess I hit a patch of ice and slid toward the side. Although I fully woke back up at this point, it was too far gone. I tried to steer back onto the road, but my car slid straight off and into the small ditch between the road and the woods. Thankfully, it wasn't a bad crash at all, since the snow really lightened the impact. It still made me shaky, though. I knew right away it was going to be impossible to get out of this. My car was stuck on the incline of the ditch in thick snow. I didn't even bother getting out to try and see how bad it was. I did test my luck trying to maneuver the car to get some traction, but if anything, that just made it worse. In the middle of trying to figure everything out, I noticed a car's headlights down the road. At first, I thought it was just a car passing by, but after a few seconds, it was clear they weren't moving. Someone must have just been parked down the road with their headlights on. I found that to be a little bit unnerving. What were the chances of this, being on this long, empty road? They weren't close enough to have stopped to try and help me, but they weren't far enough either to not see my headlights. I pulled out my phone and called my dad, knowing he'd still be awake and hoping he'd be able to help me. I'd never been in a situation like this, so I didn't really know what to do. He said he would call roadside assistance, then drive down to wait with me. I thanked him and felt relief, knowing he would be down here in just a few minutes. I looked back out on the road, looking for the headlights from the car I'd just seen, but suddenly they were gone. It was too dark to see anything that far without lights, so I didn't know if they'd driven away or if they were still there just waiting and had turned the lights off. It really started to creep me out the more I thought about it. I kept my eyes down the road, not looking away for more than a few seconds. I began getting very paranoid. There was something about the silence as well that made it more uneasy, only hearing the wind outside my car and nothing else. After 3 minutes of waiting, I saw a figure walking toward my car out of the darkness. He was down the road, coming from the direction where the headlights had been. I watched as he slowly made his way through the snow, getting to just 15 feet away from the front of my car. He then stopped and stood there, facing me but not moving. I couldn't see much of him, as he had a hoodie covering his face, but the way he stood there in my headlights started to terrify me. After a moment, I honked my horn softly a few times, just to let them know I was in the car and I could see them. They didn't move or acknowledge me. Just as I was pulling out my phone to call my dad again, the man turned around and walked away, disappearing down the road. I still called my father to let him know about this really strange person that was out here. He said he was just a minute away. I stayed on the phone with him this time, and only 30 seconds later, I saw headlights turn on down the road and begin moving toward my car. Once they were right across from me, they parked and turned off their lights once more. I couldn't see over the ditch, but I heard a door open. I yelled through my phone what was going on. Just then, my dad's car pulled right in front of my view and screeched to a stop. I heard him yelling at someone. They got back in their car and sped away. They did not come back. My dad said the guy had been holding something in his hands. It looked like a crowbar or something he was going to use to break into my car. Everything went okay after that though, and the car ended up not even having much damage to it. I'm not sure what was about to happen that night, but I'm lucky my dad pulled up exactly when he did. When I was 10, my family moved into a new neighborhood. The first person we met lived just across the street, Millie. Not her real name, obviously. She was a nice elderly lady who was always out on her porch swing with her cats. She told us she was a widow and a grandmother who had lived in that same house for 40 years now. She was excited to have kids, being my sister and I, out on the block and playing again. She just seemed like a lonely old lady and gave off no red flags, nor did she show any strange behavior. One afternoon, a week or two after first moving in, my mom and I were unpacking some boxes when we heard terrified screaming from across the street. I ran outside to see what was going on, while my mom called the police. I saw two women who I'd never seen before running out of Millie's house. One was bleeding from her arm and hand and screaming for help. Millie came out of the door, yelling at them to get out of her house over and over, holding a bloody kitchen knife. Terrified, I ran inside crying. The police arrived and took both women away, leaving us to wonder what exactly was going on here. A few days later, my mom met the stabbed woman, Holly. She explained what exactly had happened. It turned out Millie had never lived in that house, and the cats she loved so much were really Holly's. Millie had been sitting on Holly's porch during the day while Holly was away at work for several months on end. At some point, she found a spare key Holly kept hidden in her garden and had been going into the house during the day, leaving before Holly returned. Holly had begun to notice things were off in her home, but didn't think much of it at first. On the day of her attack, Holly happened to come home early and find Millie in her kitchen. Millie screamed and went after her with the knife, demanding she get out of her house. Millie was deeply mentally ill and had the delusion that everything in that house was hers. The police had told Holly she seemed particularly attached to the cats. Perhaps her connection to them triggered these deep delusions. Remembering this story now, I always feel a mix of sadness and being creeped out. Holly moved away a year or two after the incident. It's a mystery what happened to Millie. If she got help, was put in an institution, prison, taken by her family, I guess we'll never know. I do Uber Eats on the weekends, and sometimes on days when school is out. This happened just a couple of weeks before our school's holiday break. It was a Friday night, and I didn't have any plans at all. I figured, why not make a few extra bucks instead of being bored and laying around the house all day long? I started driving, set up the app to start getting orders. It wasn't really snowing out, but it was really cold and windy. There was still a thin layer of snow on the roads from earlier that day. I think it was around 6 p.m. or so when I started. I did a few orders before I got one to pick up from a nearby Burger King. Once I got the food, I checked on the app where I was going. It was clear at a first glance that this wasn't a real house address. When I zoomed in a little bit more, I was confused to see it was at the corner of two streets, looking like maybe a gas station. Although finding it to be unusual, I clicked begin route and started driving over. I didn't think it was anything bad. I just thought it was going to be an awkward interaction, since I'd probably have to find the person in the parking lot and give it to them directly. Usually, I'd never even see the customers. I just do a quick drop-off. As I got closer and drove up to the intersection it was at, I saw that it was indeed a gas station. That was right in the spot the directions were taking me to. The gas station itself looked normal, but there were no cars in the parking lot. I pulled in and parked in one of the spots at the back, then stayed in my car. I tried to look around for anyone. The app should have let them know that I'd arrived, so I was expecting someone to be out there waiting for me. Even after a couple of minutes though, I didn't see anybody around here. I sent a text through the app just letting them know I was in the parking lot, waiting for them to come get their food. I got out of my car to see if I could get a better look around. The whole intersection was empty. No cars were passing by. All the stores on the street seemed to be closed for the night. The longer I stood out there, the more unsettled I became. I checked my phone, still seeing no response from the customer. I was just about to get back into my car when a truck pulled into the gas station. They passed the pumps and drove right up to me, parking just a couple of spots away. It was an older, dark red pickup with tinted windows. The first thought to come through my head was, why would they order a delivery if they were going to end up driving there anyway? I thought initially that maybe it was a worker at the gas station or somebody just hanging out here, but now this was way more suspicious than it already was. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out of the truck. From one look at him, I could see he had a very disheveled appearance, like someone you'd expect to see living out on the road. Even his clothes looked dirty, stained, and torn. As he got out, I held up the bag with a slight smile, but the man didn't even look at it. He kept his eyes locked on me. As he approached, something struck me, giving the feeling I needed to get out of there immediately. I set the bag on the ground. Almost immediately, the man started sprinting, as if he knew I was getting ready to leave. I got back in my car and started backing out, just as the man got up to my door. He ran back to his truck, leaving the bag of the food there on the ground. As I left the gas station, I saw him back out quickly and start speeding toward the exit I was leaving from. I floored it, going through a red light and speeding down the road until I got to where more cars were. The truck tried to follow me for a minute or so, but then turned away. Once I was safe, I called the police, but nothing really came of it. In the heat of the moment, I never even thought to check the man's license plate. Thinking back on it, I'm not even sure if he had one. I don't know what he was doing or what would have happened if I didn't leave when I did, but knowing I was that close to finding out is a horrifying thought. It was about, I want to say, 7 to 8 years ago. I was living in an apartment complex doing online college courses while trying to help a friend start up a business. It fell through eventually, but that's neither here or there. It was about 3 a.m. I was still writing a paper when I heard someone pull up to the building and into the parking lot. I looked out to see a truck. Nothing special. I kept on writing. A few moments later, though, I heard a desperate screaming. I looked out, and this lady was next to the truck that just pulled in, screaming and spinning in a circle with the driver's side door open. She's got her hands up near her hair, waving them around. I thought to myself, Wasp must have gotten into the truck or something and she's freaking out. It didn't trip any mental alarms. I saw this guy running up to her and thought, oh, I guess a friend is arriving to help. I turned back and tried to remember where I was in the paper. About a minute later, though, I started hearing a noise I knew very well, metal on concrete. As a kid, when playing baseball in the street, I liked to bash my bat against the street a few times and pretend to swing before having my friend throw the ball. I heard it again over and over. I looked out and noticed the guy was now bashing what looked like a random spot on the concrete behind someone's car. My weird shit alarm was now going off, and without any personal context, I called my roommate to see if he was noticing this too. By the time we got to looking out again, the noise had stopped. We were instead treated to what looked like vehicular vandalism as a car pulled out of a space opposite my building, pulled closer to the cars on my row, and scraped their sides real slow before racing off. I noticed the door to the truck was still open. At this point, I felt compelled to figure out what was going on. Outside, I crawled out as I approached the truck. I saw the prone form of a woman pushed up under it. Once I saw all the blood, it clicked together. Somebody had ambushed her, beat her to death with a blunt metal object, and ran her over for good measure. I had just witnessed someone's brutal murder without even realizing it. I immediately yelled to my roommate to call 911, as he was the only one who had enough sense to bring a phone. I answered a ton of questions to the cops, and even ended up testifying it. Someone on the other side of the building had seen more, but I was apparently the only one to actually go out there to call the cops. It haunted me for months. Sometimes I'd hallucinate a little, thinking I'd see her mutilated body sitting in the back of my car through my mirror. These days, if I hear anything weird going on outside my house, I check or immediately call the cops if it sounds dangerous. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with, and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now, guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.